At a busy city intersection, a millionaire waited for the light to change, lost in his own thoughts. Suddenly, a boy approaches, holding out a box of sweets and telling, with distressed eyes, about his mother's illness. The man almost ignores the request, but a memory from the past makes him hesitate. At that moment, he makes a decision that will change both of their destinies forever. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us which city you're watching us from and we'll keep going. The rain was beating down on the city that June night, turning the avenues into mighty rivers that reflected the city lights. Victor watched the drops run down the bulletproof glass of his Mercedes-Benz as he waited for the traffic light to change. The clock read 10:43 p.m., and his thoughts were still on the last meeting of the day, where he had closed yet another million-dollar acquisition for his business empire. By the age of 45, Victor had built one of the largest business conglomerates in the country. His austere face and piercing gaze were his trademark, as were his impeccably tailored suits and a posture that exuded power. Nothing in his life was left to chance. Every minute was calculated. Every decision was strategic. Every relationship was evaluated for the potential benefits it could bring. It was then that his eyes caught sight of a singular figure through the fogged-up glass. A boy no more than 12 years old was crossing between the cars with a box of chocolates in his hands. His soaked clothes clung to his thin body, and his bare feet stepped through the puddles without hesitation. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of determination and vulnerability, that made Victor frown. The boy approached his car, and Victor, in an impulse that not even he understood, lowered the window a few centimeters. The boy, with a shy but resilient smile, offered, "Sir, do you want to buy a chocolate? It's only 2 reais each." It was at that moment that something unusual caught Victor's attention. The box of chocolates, although worn from use, had a name engraved on its sides: Elena. The businessman felt his heart skip a beat. Elena was the name of his mother, a woman who had dedicated part of her life to social projects, donating personalized boxes to people in vulnerable situations. "Where did you get that box?" Victor asked, his voice softer than usual. The boy, who would later introduce himself as Thomas, clutched the box to his chest as if it were his most precious possession. "It was a gift from the owner of the shelter where we stayed for a while. She said it was from a very special lady." Victor looked more closely at the boy. His eyes, despite their obvious tiredness, shone with an intensity that was familiar to him. He reminded him of someone from his past, but he couldn't say who. "Get in the car," Victor found himself saying, surprising himself. "It's freezing out there." Thomas hesitated, his bare feet forming small puddles on the asphalt. The rain continued to fall mercilessly, and the fatigue was visible on his young face. After a few seconds of consideration, he accepted the invitation. Inside the warm car, Thomas held the box of chocolates tightly, as if it were an anchor that kept him safe in the midst of the storm of his life. It was then that he began to tell his story, words escaping like a dammed river that finally finds a break. "I sell chocolates to help my mother. She is sick and needs expensive medicine. We have no one else, just the 2 of us." "What's your mother's name?" Victor asked, a strange feeling beginning to form in his chest. "Amanda," Thomas replied. "Amanda." The name struck Victor like a bolt of lightning. Images from the past flooded his mind. A young, smiling face, promises made in the summer sun, rash decisions made in the heat of youth. Amanda was not just a name from the past. She was an unfinished story that now came back to confront him. The light changed, but Victor stood still, ignoring the impatient honking behind his car. For the first time in years, his spreadsheets, meetings, and acquisitions seemed insignificant. There, sitting beside him, was a boy who carried not only a box with his mother's name on it, but possibly more of his own history than he could ever imagine. "Do you have anywhere to go tonight?" Victor asked, his voice betraying a concern he hadn't felt in a long time. Thomas shook his head. "We've been living in a rented room, but we were evicted yesterday. Mom is in temporary housing, and I was trying to get money to at least buy her medicine." Victor made a decision that would change not just that night, but the rest of his life. I'm going to take you to your mother, and then we'll talk about how I can help you." As he drove through the wet city streets, Victor felt that something bigger than himself was at work. The rain continued to fall, but now it seemed more like a prelude to something new than a melancholy ending. Fate, which he had always tried to control with an iron fist, had found a way to surprise him, using a simple box of chocolates as an instrument for a turn of events that not even his most elaborate business plans could have foreseen. Victor's car wound through the narrow streets on the outskirts of town, a stark contrast to the luxurious surroundings he usually frequented. Tomas guided him through alleys and lanes until they reached a small community shelter, its peeling walls illuminated by the dim light of a single bulb in the entrance. "This is it," Thomas said, his voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. "My mother is in one of the back rooms." Upon entering the place, Victor was struck by the smell of mold and medicine. An elderly lady greeted them with a suspicious look, which only softened when she recognized Thomas. The boy quickly explained the situation, and they were led down a narrow corridor to a makeshift room. Amanda lay on a simple but clean bed. When the door opened, her eyes met Victor's and time seemed to freeze. The recognition was immediate, bringing back memories from 15 years ago. Her face, although scarred by illness, still bore traces of the young woman Victor had fallen in love with during college. "Victor," his voice was weak but full of emotion. "After so long." Thomas looked from one to the other in confusion, realizing that there was a story there that he didn't know. Victor remained silent for a few moments, processing the situation. The woman in front of him was just a shadow of the Amanda he had known, the literature student full of dreams and ideals. "Why did you never come to me?" Victor asked, his voice betraying a mixture of hurt and guilt. Amanda closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. "You had your plans, your ambition. When I found out you were pregnant, your family made it very clear that I would be an obstacle to your future." The revelation hit Victor like a punch. His father, Fernando, had always controlled his life with an iron fist, but he never imagined that he would interfere so drastically in his relationship with Amanda. "Mommy, what are you guys talking about?" Thomas asked, his small voice breaking the tension in the room. Amanda reached out to her son, pulling him closer. "Thomas, a long time ago, Victor and I loved each other. It was before you were born, when we were young and dreamed of a different future." Victor watched the boy, now with different eyes. The features that had seemed vaguely familiar to him were beginning to make sense. The shape of the eyes, the determined chin, were like mirrors of his own youth. "Why are you living here?" Victor asked, trying to understand how the situation had gotten to this point. Amanda explained that after being rejected by her own family when she revealed her pregnancy, she lived from shelter to shelter, working temporary jobs to support Tomas. The cruel irony of fate revealed itself when she revealed that her last home had been bought by one of Victor's companies, resulting in her eviction along with other families. The weight of indirect guilt in his suffering made Victor sit down heavily in a nearby chair. His business decisions, which he had always seen as purely strategic, had directly affected his own son's life. "I have to fix this," Victor said, more to himself than to the others. "You can't stay here." Tomas, who had been watching everything in silence until then, approached Victor with the box of chocolates still in his hands. "The lady who gave me this box said that the person who donated it believed that small acts of kindness could change the world. That was your mother, wasn't it?" Victor nodded, remembering Elena and her tireless work with social projects. What an irony of fate that one of her boxes had ended up in the hands of her unknown grandson. "Amanda, I want to help you," Victor said, his voice firm. "Not because I have to, but because it's the right thing to do. Let me provide you with a suitable place to live, the best doctors for your treatment." Amanda tried to protest, but her coughing interrupted her. Tomas immediately ran to get water for his mother, demonstrating a maturity beyond his years. "I'm not asking for permission," Victor continued. "I've already lost 15 years of my son's life. I'm not going to lose another day." The night was advancing outside, and the rain was finally beginning to ease. Inside that small sheltered room, 3 lives that fate had separated were beginning to reconnect. Victor, the businessman who had always planned every step of his life, now found himself facing a situation that none of his plans could have foreseen. Tomas approached Victor again, this time with a crumpled piece of paper in his hands. "Do you want to read one of my poems?" he asked shyly. "I write when I'm at the traffic light waiting for the light to change." Victor took the paper carefully, as if it were a precious treasure. The words, written in childlike handwriting, told the story of a boy who sold sweets to help his mother, but dreamed of a different future. It was his own story, his son's story, written with a sensitivity that made him swallow hard. The next morning, Victor woke up in his penthouse with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. During the early hours of the morning, he had mobilized his team to prepare a furnished apartment in one of his residential developments. It wasn't just a charitable gesture, it was his first act as a father, albeit a belated one. As he prepared for the day, his hands found an old photo hidden in a drawer. In it, he and Amanda were smiling in front of the Largo San Francisco Law School. She was holding a book of poetry by Carlos Drummond de Andrade, her favorite author. The memory made him smile bitterly. At the time, he considered literature a waste of time, focused only on his rise in the corporate world. At 9 a.m. sharp, his driver, Regina, was already waiting for him in the garage. "To the shelter in the East Zone," she ordered, checking the dozens of unanswered messages on her cell phone. For the first time in his career, the meetings scheduled for that day seemed insignificant. At the shelter, she found Tomas awake, organizing his few belongings in a battered backpack. The boy had fallen asleep right there, refusing to leave his mother. Amanda was more willing, although still visibly weak. "I brought you new clothes," Victor said, handing over some department store bags he had picked up earlier in the night. "And everything is ready in the new apartment." Tomas looked at the clothes with wide eyes, but it was Amanda who spoke up. "Victor, we don't need charity. I just want Tomas to have a chance to study and—" "It's not charity," Victor interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "It's the least I can do after all this time. Please, Amanda, let me try to make amends." As Amanda changed with the help of a shelter volunteer, Victor watched as Tomas pulled a battered notebook out of his backpack. "Are these more poems?" he asked, genuinely interested. "Yes," the boy replied hesitantly. "I write about the people I see at the lighthouse. There's a lady who always buys all my chocolates on Wednesdays, a gentleman who gives me advice about school." Victor leafed through the notebook, surprised by the sensitivity of the observations. Tomas didn't just sell candy, he catalogued stories, capturing humanity amid urban chaos. It was a gift he had surely inherited from Amanda. The drive to their new apartment was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The building was modern and safe, a completely different world than Tomas and Amanda were used to. As they opened the door to the apartment, Tomas ran from room to room, his eyes shining with excitement. The place was fully furnished, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a balcony that overlooked the neighborhood. "There's even an office," the boy exclaimed, discovering a room with empty bookshelves and a desk. "Can I use it to write?" "It's yours," Victor replied, feeling an unfamiliar emotion at seeing his son's joy. "We can fill the shelves with books, if you want." Amanda watched everything with tears in her eyes, leaning against the doorframe. Victor approached her, speaking in a low voice. "I've already arranged an appointment with the best specialists for this afternoon. Let's take care of your health first, then we'll sort out the rest." "Why are you doing all this, Victor?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Because for years I built an empire of glass and steel, but I forgot to build what really matters," he replied, watching Tomas, who was now exploring the kitchen. "Maybe the universe used a box of my mother's chocolates to teach me that lesson." At that moment, Tomas came running back with a piece of paper in his hand. "Look, Dad, I've written a new poem," he said, using that word for the first time, Dad, which hit Victor like a wave of unexpected emotion. The businessman took the paper with slightly trembling hands, reading the words written in the boy's uneven handwriting. It was a poem about new beginnings, about a rain that washed away the past and brought hope. Victor realized that his son didn't just write. He transformed reality through words, finding beauty even in the most difficult moments. "I'll have to go away for a few hours," Victor said, carefully tucking the poem into his jacket pocket. Regina will stay here to help you with whatever you need, and I'll be back to accompany you to your doctor's appointment." Before leaving, Victor took in the scene once more, his son excitedly exploring his new home, Amanda smiling despite her tiredness, the bags of new clothes spread out on the couch. It was just the beginning of a long journey of reconnection and healing, but for the first time in his life he felt like he was on the right path. The following weeks brought profound changes to the lives of the three. Victor completely reorganized his schedule, delegating less important meetings to his directors and prioritizing afternoons with Thomas. Amanda, under intensive medical care, began to show signs of improvement, although the treatment would still be long. One particularly significant afternoon, Victor arrived early at the apartment and found Thomas hunched over his office desk, focused on his notebooks. "Studying?" he asked, leaving his briefcase on the couch. "Trying," Thomas replied with a sigh. "The teacher said I need to improve my math if I want to pass the year." Victor approached, observing the fraction exercises that seemed to confuse the boy. He sat down next to him, removing his jacket and loosening his tie. "You know, when I was your age, I thought math was a big deal too," he confessed, picking up a pencil. "Until my mother, your grandmother Eleanor, taught me a trick." Over the next hour, Victor patiently explained the concepts, using candy as a practical example, a reference that made Thomas smile. The boy, who had initially seemed intimidated by his father's presence, began to open up, asking questions and showing genuine curiosity. "Dad," Thomas called after correctly solving a series of problems, "what was Grandma Elena like?" Victor felt his heart sink. He stood up and went to his briefcase, from where he took out an old photo. In it, Elena was smiling in front of an orphanage, surrounded by children. "Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman," he began, his voice soft with memory. "While my father was building our business empire, she was building bridges between people. Those personalized chocolate boxes were just a small part of her social work." Thomas held the photo carefully, as if it were a sacred relic. "Is that why you've changed so much? Because of her?" The question took Victor by surprise. "What do you mean? I heard Mom talking to Aunt Regina. They said you were different before, that you only cared about work and money." Victor thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes we have to get lost to find ourselves. Your grandmother always tried to show me that, but I was too busy following in my father's footsteps to understand." At that moment, Amanda appeared at the office door, flushed and stronger after weeks of proper treatment. She smiled when she saw father and son together studying. "It's time for your medicine," Victor reminded him, checking his watch. "I've already taken it," she replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Regina doesn't let a minute go by." The mention of the driver made Victor smile. Regina, who had initially been assigned only to help the family, had become a constant and beloved presence, a sort of step-aunt to Thomas. "Mom, come and see," Thomas called excitedly. "Dad taught me a new way to solve fractions. Now I understand why a quarter plus a quarter equals a half." Amanda walked over, looking at the solved exercises. "Impressive," she said, exchanging a meaningful look with Victor. "You've always had a gift for teaching, even in college." "And you always had a gift for seeing the best in people," he replied, remembering the times when Amanda helped him see beyond numbers and spreadsheets. Thomas, noticing the moment between his parents, took out his poetry notebook. "Do you want to hear what I wrote today?" They both nodded, and the boy began to read a poem about transformation, about how people could change like the seasons. Victor recognized between the lines their story: an absent father who learned to love, a warrior mother who never gave up, a son who united them with his art. "I think we found our next Carlos Drummond," joked Amanda, hugging her son. "No," Victor corrected, "we found our first Thomas." The sound of the surname made Thomas look up in surprise. It was the first time Victor had called him that, making official in words what their hearts already knew. "Tomorrow," Victor continued, "we can go to the registry office to begin the paternity recognition process. That is if you want, Thomas." The boy didn't respond with words. Instead, he stood up and hugged Victor, a tight hug that said more than any poem could express. Amanda watched the scene with tears in her eyes, thinking about how life could surprise. Even in the most unlikely moments, the news of Thomas's paternity recognition caused a real earthquake in the empire. Fernando, Victor's father and patriarch of the family, called an emergency meeting at the holding company's main office on the top floor of one of the most imposing buildings on the avenue. Victor arrived promptly at 10 a.m., finding his father already seated at the head of the conference table. Fernando, at 70 years old, still maintained the authoritarian posture that characterized him, his icy blue eyes fixed on his only son. "Have you lost your mind?" were his first words. Recognizing a street urchin as the heir of the Victor remained calm, settling back in his chair. "Thomas is my son, Dad, and Amanda was never just anyone, as you insisted on labeling her 15 years ago." "That woman got pregnant on purpose," Fernando shouted, banging his fist on the table. "She was a literature student with no future, who saw in you an opportunity for social advancement." "How can you be so sure?" Victor asked, his voice controlled but firm. "Is that why you sent her away without consulting me? Is that why you paid her family to reject her as well?" Fernando paled slightly, revealing that Victor had discovered the truth. Over the past few weeks, a discreet investigation had revealed how his father had orchestrated Amanda's estrangement, using his influence and money to ensure that she disappeared from his son's life. "I did what was necessary to protect our legacy," Fernando defended himself. "You were too young, you had a bright future ahead of you. An unwanted pregnancy would destroy everything. And don't you find it ironic that, precisely because of your actions, I have become exactly the kind of man my mother so feared I would become?" The mention of Elena made Fernando look away for the first time. His late wife had always been his weak point, the only person capable of questioning his decisions. "Elena would have loved Thomas," Victor continued. "She would have seen in him the same gift for poetry, the same sensitivity to see beauty where others see only numbers." "Poetry does not keep an empire standing," Fernando replied, but his voice no longer carried the same conviction. "No, but it reminds us why we built empires in the first place," Victor replied, standing up. "Thomas will be recognized as my son and Amanda will receive all the support she deserves. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm communicating my decision." Before Fernando could answer, the door to the room opened. Regina, the driver, hurried in. "Mr. Victor, sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this," she said, holding out a tablet. On the screen, a viral video showed Thomas reciting one of his poems in front of the old lighthouse where he sold chocolates. The recording, made by a passerby, had been shared thousands of times in just a few hours. Comments praised the boy's sensitivity and his story of overcoming adversity. Fernando watched in silence, his face an unreadable mask. In the video, Thomas spoke about second chances and how love could transform lives. His simple but profound words were very reminiscent of Elena's way of seeing the world. "He has her gift," Fernando murmured, almost involuntarily. "Yes, it does," Victor agreed. "And unlike what I've done for years, I won't let money and power stifle that gift." At that moment, Victor received a message from Amanda. Thomas had gotten his first perfect score in math and wanted to share the news with his father. An involuntary smile appeared on his face. "If you'll excuse me, Dad, my son is waiting for me," Victor said, heading for the door. "And when you're ready to meet your real grandson without prejudice, you know where to find us." Leaving a pensive Fernando behind, Victor entered the elevator feeling lighter. The shadows of the past were still there, but now he had enough strength to face them. His cell phone vibrated again. It was a photo of Thomas proudly showing his math test, with a little poem written in the margin of the paper. On the way home, Victor reflected on how his life had changed in such a short time. The cold and calculating businessman was giving way to a man who was rediscovering the value of simple things, guided by the wisdom of a boy who transformed his life experience into verses. Weeks had passed since the tense meeting with Fernando. Victor had thrown himself headlong into his new life, balancing corporate responsibilities with his role as a father. One afternoon, while helping Thomas with an essay on how to change the world, an idea began to germinate in his mind. What if we could help other children like you? Victor asked, watching his son focus on his writing. Tomas looked up, curious. What do you mean, Dad? Well, you got a second chance, but what about the other boys and girls who are still at the traffic lights selling candy or asking for help? The conversation that followed lasted for hours, with Thomas sharing his experiences on the streets and Victor listening intently, taking notes. Amanda joined in, bringing her perspective as someone who had lived in shelters and faced countless hardships raising a child alone. That's how the idea for the Dochuras No Farol Foundation was born. The name, suggested by Thomas, was a tribute to the box of chocolates that had changed their lives. The goal was to create a space that would offer not only shelter and education, but also opportunities for vulnerable children to develop their talents. Victor mobilized his legal team to begin the process of creating the foundation. He wanted to do this right, not as just another corporate social responsibility project, but as something truly transformative. A month later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, the family visited the land that would house the foundation's headquarters. It was a large space in the city's east zone, not far from where Thomas used to sell his chocolates. Here we will have classrooms, Victor explained, walking around the grounds with Thomas and Amanda. There a library, and in that space I thought of creating an amphitheater for artistic performances. Thomas listened to everything with shining eyes, already imagining the possibilities. Can we have poetry lessons too? Sure, Victor smiled. In fact, I was wondering if you'd like to teach some of these classes, share what you know with other kids. The idea made Thomas excited and a little nervous. But what if I'm not good enough? It was Amanda who responded, hugging her son. You have a gift, my love, and sharing that gift is a way of multiplying it. As they walked back to the car, Victor noticed a group of children playing in a nearby vacant lot. His eyes met those of a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, holding a patched-up soccer ball. Hey, you guys, Victor called, approaching the fence. Would you like to see what we're building here? The children looked at each other, suspicious at first, but the presence of Thomas, who had joined his father, encouraged them. Soon Victor found himself surrounded by a small, curious group, explaining in simple terms what the foundation would be. And will you be able to study here? Asked a girl with braids, her eyes wide with hope. Not only study, Thomas replied, taking the lead. You can dream here too. That impromptu afternoon of presentations went on for hours. Victor, Amanda, and Thomas listened to the children's stories, dreams, and struggles. When they finally said goodbye, it was already getting dark, and Victor's heart was filled with renewed determination. On the way back home, the silence in the car was comfortable, everyone absorbed in their own thoughts. It was Thomas who finally broke the silence. Dad, I wrote a new poem. Can I read it to you? Victor nodded, exchanging a smile with Amanda in the rearview mirror. Thomas began to recite. In the lighthouse of life, where red sometimes lingers, a flower of hope is born. That concrete does not devour. It's sweet like candy, strong as a child's dream, a foundation of love that transforms pain into dance. At the now green lighthouse, we move on to a new tomorrow, where every child is a poet from the story itself that will come. When Thomas finished, there were tears in Amanda's eyes and a lump in Victor's throat. That simple poem perfectly captured the essence of what they were trying to build. I think we just found our founding motto, Victor said, his voice cracking with emotion. That night, lying in bed, Victor reflected on how his life had changed. The man who had once cared only about profits and acquisitions now dreamed of building a place where children could flourish. And it was all thanks to an unexpected encounter on a rainy night, a box of chocolates, and the wisdom of a boy poet. The Lighthouse Sweets Foundation was just beginning, but it had already profoundly transformed its creator. Victor fell asleep, with a smile on his lips, looking forward to the dawn and the challenges that would come. Challenges that, for the first time in his life, he was genuinely happy to face. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity for the family. Construction of the Lighthouse Sweets Foundation was progressing rapidly, and Victor divided his time between overseeing the project and his corporate responsibilities. Thomas, for his part, was delving deeper and deeper into his poetic talent, now encouraged not only by his parents but also by private tutors that Victor had hired to supplement his education. One Wednesday afternoon, Victor arrived home earlier than usual, finding Thomas hunched over a pile of books in the living room. "Studying hard?" he asked, loosening his tie. Thomas looked up, a mix of excitement and concern on his face. "Dad, did you know there are different types of poetry? Sonnets, haikus, concrete poetry, and there's so much." Victor sat next to his son, looking at the books scattered around. There were titles by Carlos Drummond de Andrade, Cecilia Meireles, and even some volumes by translated international poets. "Does that scare you?" he asked gently. Thomas hesitated for a moment. "A little. What if I'm not good enough to teach at the foundation? What if I disappoint the other kids?" Victor placed his hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the weight of the responsibility that he himself, without realizing it, had placed on the boy's shoulders. "Thomas, do you remember the day you taught me to see beauty in a red light?" The boy nodded, remembering the first poems he had written while selling candy at the lighthouse. "Well, you did that without knowing what a sonnet or a haiku was. Poetry isn't in books, son. It's in your heart, in your way of seeing the world." At that moment, Amanda entered the room, carrying a tray of hot chocolate. She had overheard part of the conversation and decided to intervene. "You know, Thomas," she began, pouring the cups, "when I was in college, there was a professor who always said, 'Technique imprisons, but it also liberates.' What he meant was that knowing the rules can give us more tools to express what we feel." Thomas picked up his cup, thoughtful. "So it's okay if I don't know everything yet?" "Of course not," Victor replied. "In fact, that's great. It means that you and the children at the foundation will learn together. It's not about being a teacher, but about sharing a journey." Thomas's face lit up at this prospect. He picked up one of his notebooks and began to leaf through it. "I have an idea for the first class," he said excitedly. "We could ask each child to write about what they see from their window. That way, even those who think they can't write poetry will realize that they're already doing it every day, just by observing the world." Victor and Amanda exchanged looks of pride. Their son was not only overcoming his fears, but also finding creative ways to inspire others. "For that reminds me," Victor said, standing up, "I have a surprise for you." He went to his briefcase and took out some papers, handing them to Amanda. "These are the final documents for the foundation," he explained. "We need a board of directors. Amanda, I'd like you to be the director of educational projects." Amanda was stunned. Over the past few months, she had become increasingly involved in the project, offering valuable insights based on her experience, but she hadn't expected a formal invitation. "Victor, I don't know if I'm ready," she hesitated. "You've lived through what these children are living through," Victor argued. "Your perspective is invaluable. Plus, your background in literature will be key to structuring cultural programs." Thomas, who had been watching the scene with interest, suddenly had an idea. "Mom, it's like poetry. You already have all the knowledge inside you. You just need to put it on paper." Amanda couldn't help but laugh at the analogy. "When did you get so wise, huh?" The family spent the rest of the evening discussing ideas for the foundation. Thomas suggested an annual poetry festival where the children could showcase their work. Amanda proposed partnering with publishers to publish anthologies of the students' best work. Victor, in turn, talked about the possibility of expanding the project to other cities in the future. When they finally went to bed, Victor realized that something fundamental had changed. The Lighthouse Suites Foundation was no longer just his personal redemption project. It had become a shared dream, a goal that brought his family together in ways he never imagined possible. Lying in bed, mentally replaying the day's events, Victor found himself smiling at the ceiling. The challenges were many. It was true. There were financial matters to resolve, bureaucracy to navigate, and hearts and minds to win. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right track. Not because he was building an empire of concrete and steel, but because he was helping to shape the future through the words, dreams, and hopes of a new generation. The sun had barely risen when Victor woke up that Saturday morning. Today was The big day, the official opening of the Dochura's No Farol Foundation. Months of planning, construction and preparation culminated in this moment. As he got ready, Victor reflected on the journey that had brought him here. A little over a year ago, he had been a different man, cold, calculating, obsessed with profit and power. Now, as he straightened his tie in front of the mirror, he saw a reflection transformed not only by the passage of time, but by the power of love and redemption. In the kitchen, he found Amanda and Thomas already standing, a mixture of nervousness and excitement hanging in the air. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, pouring himself some coffee. Thomas, wearing a dress shirt that made him look older than his 13 years, nodded energetically. "I can't wait to see the other kids learn about the foundation." Amanda, for her part, looked a little apprehensive. "What if no one comes? What if the families don't trust us?" Victor took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "They will come. Regina and the social work team have done an incredible job over the past few weeks, visiting communities and explaining the project." The journey to the foundation was silent, each person immersed in their own thoughts and expectations. Upon arrival, they were greeted by a small crowd of employees, volunteers and journalists who had already gathered in front of the main gate. The Dochura's foundation building at Farol was an impressive sight, modern yet welcoming, with large windows that allowed plenty of natural light to flood in. Colorful murals painted by local artists decorated the exterior walls, depicting scenes of children dreaming, reading and creating. As Victor prepared for his opening speech, Thomas pulled him aside. "Dad, can I read a poem I wrote for today?" he asked, his voice betraying a mix of anxiety and determination. Victor smiled, placing his hand on his son's shoulder. "Of course you can. In fact, I can't think of a better way for us to start this day." At 10 o'clock sharp, Victor stepped onto the small stage set up in the foundation's central courtyard. At his side were Amanda and Thomas, both visibly moved. The audience, larger than they had expected, was a mosaic of faces. There were businessmen in expensive suits, humble families from the local community, journalists with their cameras and notepads, and what moved Victor most, dozens of children, with eyes shining with expectation. "Good morning, everyone," Victor began, his voice firm into the microphone. "Today is not just the inauguration of a building or the launch of a social project. Today is the beginning of a journey of transformation." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "A year ago, I was a different man. I believed that success was measured only by numbers on a spreadsheet. It took an encounter with a boy selling candy at a rainy traffic light for me to understand the true meaning of wealth." Victor then briefly told the story of how he met Thomas, how he rediscovered Amanda, and how this unlikely meeting led him to question everything he believed in. The Dochura's No Farol Foundation was born from a promise, the promise that no child will have to choose between dreaming and surviving. Here we will offer not only education and support, but also a space for each young person to discover and develop their unique talents. He then turned to Thomas, gesturing for his son to come closer. "And now I would like to turn the floor over to someone who is the true inspiration behind this project. My son, Thomas." A murmur of surprise ran through the audience. Many there were unaware of the personal story behind the foundation. Thomas, visibly nervous but determined, approached the microphone. From his pocket, he took a folded piece of paper. "Good morning," he began, his voice growing more confident with each word. "I wrote this poem thinking of all of us who have felt invisible but never stopped dreaming." And then, with surprising clarity for one so young, Thomas began to recite, "In the lighthouse of life, where red seems eternal, there are candies of hope waiting for the green. Every dream is a seed that the asphalt cannot contain, each child an unwritten verse of a larger poem. Here in this place of bricks and dreams, we build bridges between who we are and who we can be. Every book is a window, every pencil a magic wand turning the impossible into I can, I will, I am. We are all sweetness in the lighthouse of life, waiting for our chance to shine. And today, in this new dawn, we discovered that the light was always green to dream." When Thomas finished, There was a moment of stunned silence followed by a burst of applause. Many in the audience had tears in their eyes, touched by the depth and sincerity of the young poet's words. Victor, overcome with emotion, embraced his son, feeling a pride that transcended any business achievement he had ever had. Amanda joined them, forming a family embrace that symbolized everything the foundation stood for: unity, love, and hope. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity. Families explored the facilities, children participated in art and literature workshops, journalists asked questions and took photos. In the late afternoon, when the last visitor had left and the doors were closed, Victor, Amanda, and Thomas sat exhausted but happy on the front steps. "We did it," Amanda said, her voice thick with emotion. "No," Victor corrected, looking at his son with pride. "We're just getting started." Thomas, with a tired but radiant smile, took out his poetry notebook. "I already have ideas for the first class on Monday." As the sun set, painting the city sky in shades of orange and pink, the three stood there, contemplating the future they had built together. The Dotura's No For All Foundation was more than a social project. It was a beacon of hope, lighting the way to a sweeter, more just tomorrow. The weeks following the opening of the Dotura's No For All Foundation were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The project, which had begun as a form of personal redemption for Victor, quickly took on a life of its own, growing beyond even the most optimistic expectations. On a sunny Tuesday morning, Victor arrived at the foundation early. As he entered the main lobby, he was greeted by a lively buzz coming from the classrooms. Curious, he approached one of the half-open doors. Inside the room, Thomas stood before a diverse group of children, all of them listening intently to his words. "Remember," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm, "poetry is everywhere. In the streets you walk, in the people you meet, even in the noise of the bus." Victor watched in wonder as his son had transformed from a shy boy into a confident young teacher. The children around Thomas ranged in age, some clearly from the streets, others from more well-rounded families, but they all shared the same sparkle in their eyes, the sparkle of discovery. As he walked through the halls, Victor found Amanda coming out of another room carrying a stack of books. "How are things going?" he asked, helping her with the books. Amanda smiled, tired but visibly happy. "Better than we could have imagined. You know that girl, Louisa, who barely spoke when she arrived? She wrote an entire poem yesterday about her family." Victor nodded, remembering the girl with the braids who barely looked up when spoken to. "That's amazing. What about the other programs?" "The tutoring classes are full," Amanda replied, "and the family assistance program is already making a difference. Just yesterday, we got Mariana's father a job at one of our sponsors' companies." As they were talking, they were interrupted by Regina, who approached with a worried expression. "Mr. Victor, we have a problem. The city is questioning our operating license. Apparently, there was an anonymous complaint about irregularities." Victor frowned. The foundation had followed all legal procedures to the letter. A complaint at this point could only mean one thing. Someone was trying to sabotage the project. "I understand," he said, remaining calm. "I will handle this personally. Please prepare all the documents we have." As Regina walked away to complete her task, Victor turned to Amanda. "I think we underestimated how many people would be upset by our success." Amanda nodded, worried. "What will we do?" "What we have always done," Victor replied with determination. "We will face this head-on and with transparency." In the days that followed, Victor was plunged into a bureaucratic battle to defend the foundation. Meetings with lawyers, visits to City Hall, and long nights reviewing paperwork became his routine. Meanwhile, Amanda and Tomas kept the foundation running, determined not to let the children feel the burden of administrative problems. One night, after another long day of negotiations, Victor came home exhausted. He found Thomas in the living room, absorbed in his poetry notebook. "How was your day, Dad?" the boy asked, looking up. Victor sighed, sitting down next to his son. "Hard. Sometimes it feels like for every step we take forward, someone tries to push us 2 steps back." Tomas was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You know, Dad, today in class we were talking about metaphors. One of the kids compared life to an ocean. He said that sometimes the waves knock us down, but they also carry us forward. Victor looked at his son, surprised by the depth of his observation. And what do you think of that? I think we're in a big wave now, but if we keep paddling, we'll get to the beach. At that moment, Victor felt a surge of pride and renewed determination. His son, with his simple yet profound wisdom, had given him the perspective he needed. The next morning, armed with all the necessary documentation and a new strategy in mind, Victor went to the city hall. This time, he didn't go alone. He took with him Thomas and 3 other children from the foundation, each with a poem they had written about their hopes and dreams. The meeting with the Secretary of Social Welfare, which was initially tense and defensive, took an unexpected turn when the children began reciting their poems. The simple but powerful words about hope, change, and opportunity resonated with everyone in the room. At the end of the presentation, the secretary, visibly moved, said, "Sir, I came prepared for a legal battle, but what I saw here today was living proof of the impact of your work. You can count on my support to resolve this issue as quickly as possible." Leaving the town hall, Victor felt light for the first time in days. He looked at Thomas, who was walking beside him, chatting animatedly with the other children. "You were right about the waves," Victor said, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. "Sometimes all we need is to change the way we surf." That night, in an impromptu meeting in the family's living room, Victor, Amanda, and Thomas discussed the next steps for the foundation. "I think we need to be more proactive in showcasing our work to the community," Amanda suggested. "What about an open house where kids can present their poems and artwork?" Thomas was excited by the idea. "We could call it the Festival of Sweet Words." Victor smiled, feeling renewed by his family's enthusiasm. "It's a great idea, and we can invite officials, business people, and the press. The more people who see the real impact of our work, the harder it will be for anyone to try to bring us down." As they planned the event, Victor reflected on how each challenge they faced seemed to strengthen not only the foundation, but also the bonds between them. The Lighthouse Suites Foundation was becoming much more than a social project. It was a catalyst for change, not only for the children they served, but for everyone involved. The waves would keep coming, Victor knew that. But now, with his family by his side and the strength of the children's words and dreams driving them forward, he felt prepared to face any storm the ocean of life might throw his way. The day of the Sweet Words Festival dawned with a clear, blue sky, as if even the weather wanted to collaborate with the event. The courtyard of the Fundação de Churras no Farol had been transformed into a real open-air stage, with chairs arranged in a semicircle, a small stage decorated with flowers and colorful ribbons, and stands where the children's artistic work would be displayed. Victor arrived early, adjusting his tie as he watched the final preparations. Amanda scurried around, coordinating volunteers and calming nervous children. Thomas, dressed in a light blue dress shirt that brought out his eyes, practiced his poem, one last time in a quiet corner. As the guests began to arrive, Victor felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. There were familiar faces, business people, journalists, local politicians, but also many new faces, community residents who had been touched in some way by the foundation's work. Among the guests, Victor spotted a figure he hadn't expected. To see his father, Fernando. The family patriarch walked slowly, leaning on a cane, his eyes scanning the room with an expression that was difficult to decipher. "Dad," Victor greeted, approaching. "I didn't know you were coming." Fernando nodded slightly. "I thought it was time to see for myself what you've been up to here." Before they could continue their conversation, Amanda took the stage to kick off the event. Her voice, amplified by the microphone, echoed throughout the courtyard. "Welcome to our first Sweet Words Festival. Today you will see and hear the transformative power of words, art, and dreams. Each child who will perform here has a unique story, a voice that deserves to be heard." The performances began and the audience was swept up in a wave of emotions. Children who could barely read just a few months ago were now confidently reciting their own poems. Teenagers who had previously found expression only in street violence were now painting vibrant pictures full of hope. Victor watched everything, with a full heart, occasionally glancing at his father, trying to decipher his reactions. Fernando remained impassive, but his eyes never left the stage. Finally, it was Thomas's turn. The boy walked onto the stage with firm steps, although Victor could notice a slight tremor in his hands. "Good afternoon, everyone," Thomas began, his voice clear and strong. "The poem I'm going to recite is called The Sweetness of Beginning Again. I wrote it thinking of all of us who have felt lost but found a new path. And then, with surprising maturity," Thomas began. "At the traffic light of life, where red seemed eternal, I learned that even asphalt can bloom. Each candy sold was a seed planted, every coin a drop of water nourishing tomorrow. Today, in this garden of concrete and dreams, I see flowers sprouting where before there were only thorns. We are all poets of our own story, writing verses of hope with ink of overcoming. Sweetness is not just in the sugar in the chocolates, but in the smile of someone who discovers their own strength, in the embrace of those who understand that together we are stronger, in the word that transforms walls into bridges. Here, in this beacon of possibilities, we learned that the brightest light, it comes from within each one of us. And the light is always green to dream." When Thomas finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a burst of applause. Many in the audience were in tears, touched by the depth and sincerity of the young poet's words. Victor, moved, looked at his father. To his surprise, he saw a single tear running down Fernando's wrinkled face. The festival continued, with more performances and moving speeches. At the end, when the guests began to disperse, Fernando approached Victor. "Son," he began, his voice hoarse with restrained emotion, "I came here today expecting to see a well-intentioned but misguided charity project. What I saw was extraordinary." Victor felt a lump in his throat. "Dad, No," Fernando interrupted, raising his hand. "Let me finish. I spent years believing that success was measured only by numbers on a spreadsheet. Today I saw true success in the eyes of those children. I am proud of you, Victor." At that moment, Thomas approached, still exultant after his performance. Fernando looked at his grandson, a genuine smile lighting up his face for the first time in years. "Thomas," he said, extending his hand, "your grandfather would very much like to get to know you better." As Thomas began to chat animatedly with Fernando about poetry and his classes at the foundation, Victor felt Amanda's arm wrap around his waist. "It looks like we got a lot more than we expected today," she said, smiling. Victor nodded, watching his father and son interact as if years of distance had never existed. The Festival of Sweet Words hadn't just shown the foundation's impact to the outside world, it had also healed family wounds that had seemed impossible to close. That evening, as the family, now including Fernando, gathered for a celebratory dinner, Victor reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. From a chance encounter at a rainy lighthouse had come not only a transformative social project, but a family reconciliation, a rediscovery of values, and, above all, a new chance to make a difference in the world. The Sweetness in the Lighthouse Foundation was more than a name now. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon guiding not only the children they served, but everyone around them toward a brighter, more compassionate future. The months following the Sweet Words Festival were filled with activity and growth for the Dochura's No Farol Foundation. The success of the event not only solidified the support of the community and sponsors, but also attracted the attention of important figures on the national scene. One Wednesday morning, Victor was in his office at the foundation when he received an unexpected call. It was the advisor to the Minister of Education, inviting him to a meeting in another city to discuss the possibility of expanding the foundation's model to other cities in the country. Excited by the news, Victor immediately shared it with Amanda and Thomas over dinner that night. "That's amazing, Dad," Thomas exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "Just imagine how many more children we can help." Amanda, although equally excited, was more cautious. "It's a wonderful opportunity, but we need to be careful not to lose the essence of what we've built here." Victor nodded, understanding his wife's concerns. "You're right. We don't want this to become just another bureaucratic program. The magic is in the personal touch, in the connection we create with each child." Over the next few days, the family dedicated themselves to preparing a comprehensive presentation on the foundation's work. Tomas insisted on being an active participant, wanting to share his perspective as someone who had been directly impacted by the project. On the eve of the trip to another city, Victor received another surprise visit. His father, Fernando. "I heard about the meeting with the ministry," Fernando said, sitting down in the living room. "I came to offer my help." Victor looked at his father with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Ever since the Sweet Words Festival, Fernando had grown closer to the family, but it was still rare to see him take the initiative like this. "What kind of help, Dad?" Victor asked. Fernando smiled, a gleam of determination in his eyes. "I have contacts in another city, people who can help open doors. But more than that, I want to share a lesson that took me too long to learn. True legacy lies not in the buildings we build or the money we make, but in the lives we touch." Moved, Victor hugged his father, feeling that yet another barrier between them had been broken down. The next day, the family, accompanied by Fernando, set off for another city. The meeting at the Ministry of Education was intense and productive. Victor presented the results of the foundation. Amanda explained the pedagogical methodology they had developed. And Tomas captivated everyone with his personal story and his poems. The most impactful moment came when Tomas recited a new poem, written especially for the occasion. "Grain by grain we build mountains, word by word we rewrite destinies. Every child is a book to be written, each dream a chapter of a better country. In the streets that were once dark, now beacons of hope shine. What was bitter became sweet, and the impossible became I can. We are not just a foundation, we are the voice of a new nation, where every child has the right to dream, and every dream has a chance to come true. From north to south, from east to west, let the sweet words echo. For there are no boundaries to hope, no limits to change." At the end of the presentation, the Minister of Education was visibly moved. "What you have built," he said, "is exactly the kind of initiative our country needs. Count on the support of the ministry to expand this project." In the months that followed, the Dochura's No Farol Foundation became a national model. New units began to be planned in other capitals, always maintaining the central philosophy of valuing the individuality and creative potential of each child. Victor, Amanda, and Tomas found themselves traveling around the country, sharing their experiences and helping to establish new branches of the foundation. In each city, they were greeted with enthusiasm, both by authorities and by underprivileged communities eager for change. One afternoon, while visiting a community on the outskirts of the city, Tomas had an inspiring idea. "Dad, Mom," he said excitedly, "what if we created a network of young poets? We could connect children all over the country, sharing their stories and poems." The idea quickly took shape. With the support of technology companies, an online platform was developed where young people from all over the country could publish their poems, exchange experiences, and participate in virtual workshops. The Verses of the Country project became a national phenomenon. Children and teenagers who previously felt isolated and voiceless were now part of a vibrant community of young artists. One night, after another intense day of work, Victor found Tomas on the balcony of his house, looking thoughtfully at the city lights. "What are you thinking, son?" Victor asked, joining him. Tomas smiled, his eyes reflecting the stars. "I'm thinking about how it all started with a box of chocolates in a lighthouse. It's amazing how little things can lead to big changes." Victor hugged his son, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. "You're right. And you know what? You were the catalyst for all of this. Your heart, your poetry, your worldview. That's what inspired us to be better, to do more." As father and son gazed into the distance, Victor reflected on the incredible journey they had traveled. From a cold, calculating businessman, he had transformed into an agent of change. From a boy selling candy in the rain, Tomas had become an inspiring voice for an entire generation. The Lighthouse Sweets Foundation, which had begun as a personal redemption project, was now a national movement, touching lives and transforming realities. And all of this because one rainy night, one man decided to stop and really see the boy in front of him. The city lights shone like a sea of possibilities, reminding Victor that each light represented a life, a potential, a story waiting to be told. And thanks to the work they had begun, more and more of these lights would have the chance to shine in all their splendor. 5 years have passed since the first Dochuras Foundation unit opened in Farol. What had begun as a local project in a city was now a national network of educational and cultural centers spread across all regions of the country. The foundation's impact was measurable not only in numbers, but in the stories of transformation that echoed throughout the country. On a sunny Saturday morning, the family was preparing for a special event, the celebration of the foundation's 5th anniversary. The chosen location was significant, the same lighthouse where Victor had first met Thomas, now transformed into a memorial and cultural center. Victor, 50, watched the action from the window of his office at the foundation. His hair was now streaked with gray at the temples, but his eyes retained the gleam of determination and purpose that had guided him in recent years. Amanda walked into the room carrying a stack of books. "The first batch of the anthology has arrived," she said, smiling. "I can't wait to see how the kids react." The anthology in question was a collection of poems written by young people from all over the country, participants in the Verses of the Country program. It was a living testament to the transformative power of words and creativity. "Where's Thomas?" Victor asked, picking up one of the books and leafing through it with care. "He's already gone to the lighthouse," Amanda replied. "He said he wanted a moment alone before everyone else arrived." Victor nodded in understanding. Thomas, now 18, was about to begin a new phase in his life. Having been accepted into the Faculty of Letters at USP, he planned to continue his work in poetry and education, further expanding the foundation's reach. When Victor and Amanda arrived at the lighthouse, they found the place already filled with people. Children were running around excitedly, volunteers were putting up the last decorations, and an air of celebration was in the air. At the center of it all was Thomas, surrounded by a group of children, all of them hanging on his words as he told the story of how it all began. When he saw the parents approaching, he smiled and gestured for them to come closer. "And here are the people who made all this possible," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "My parents who taught me that love can rewrite any story." Victor felt a lump in his throat, remembering the frightened boy he had found in that same place years ago. The transformation was almost unbelievable. The event was a celebration of music, poetry, and stories of overcoming adversity. Former students of the foundation, now successful adults, shared their testimonies. Politicians and business people spoke about the impact of the program on their communities, but the most exciting moment was yet to come. Tomas stepped onto the makeshift stage, carrying with him the old box of chocolates he had kept all these years. Silence fell over the crowd. "5 years ago," he began, "I was at this very lighthouse selling candy to help my mother. Today I am here to share not candy, but sweet words that can nourish the soul." And then, with the same passion that had captivated everyone from the beginning, Thomas recited his poem. "At the crossroads of destiny, where time stands still, a box of chocolates becomes the key to tomorrow. Every sweet a promise, every word a bridge between what we were and what we can be. We are all beacons shining in the darkness, guiding each other to safe harbors. In the pages of life, we write our story with ink made of dreams and courage. From a seed of kindness, a forest of hope grew, where every tree is a testament that the impossible is possible. In the streets that were once cold, human warmth now flourishes, and what was bitter turned into the sweetest of lessons. Today we celebrate not just a foundation, but the founding of a new country, where every child is a verse waiting to be written, and each heart a poem of infinite possibilities. From the shadows of the lighthouse to the light of knowledge, we walk together hand in hand. For we have learned that true wealth, it's in the smiles we plant and the dreams we reap. May our words remain sweet, our hearts open wide, and our eyes are always attentive to see the beauty in each new dawn. When Thomas finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Victor and Amanda, holding each other close, felt a mixture of pride, gratitude, and hope that spilled over into silent tears. Fernando, now a man transformed by the experience of the past few years, approached his son and daughter-in-law. "You have built something extraordinary here," he said, his voice breaking. "Something that goes far beyond us, that will echo for generations." As the celebration continued around him, Victor reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them here. From a chance meeting on a rainy night had come not just a foundation, but a movement for social change. Every life touched, every dream realized, every kind word shared was a testament to the power of love, compassion, and belief in human potential. The Lighthouse Suites Foundation had become more than Victor had ever dreamed. It was a beacon of hope, lighting the way to a future where every child would have the opportunity to write their own success story. As the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Victor looked out at his family. Amanda, Thomas, and all those who had become a part of their lives through the foundation. He knew that no matter what the future held, the legacy they had built would continue to flourish, as sweet and powerful as the words that had changed their lives. And so, in the same lighthouse where it all began, a new story was always ready to be written, a new poem always ready to be recited, and a new life always ready to be transformed by the power of sweet words and human compassion.